Today we're going to talk about our second type of verbal phrase, which is a participial phrase. So participles are verbs that, again, they look like verbs, but they're not acting like verbs. And last time we talked about gerunds, which always end in ing and act like nouns. And participles are a little bit more confusing because they don't have such a fast and simple rule. Participles can end in any sort of verb ending like ed or en, or even sometimes ing. The difference is that they always act like adjectives. So in the purple sentence below, you can see that I said the running engine sounded weird. So here running is modifying engine. And then I also said in green, the folded paper was an origami swan. And in that case, folded is a participle. And both of those are acting as adjectives to modify the nouns that come after them. So it's the running engine and the folded paper. So those were just examples of participles, but then we can also talk about participial phrases, which are participles plus all of their modifiers. So in green, I have just an example of a simple participle. So I said the glazed donuts are my favorite. And here, glazed is acting as an adjective to modify donuts. But I could turn that into a seasonal participial phrase by saying the donuts glazed with caramel are my favorite. And now glazed with caramel is the whole participial phrase. And you'll remember last time I talked about how phrases can start to be sort of like onions where they get layers. So this is a good example of how that with caramel prepositional phrase is kind of tacked onto that larger participial phrase to kind of give layers to our sentence here. And like other phrases, participial phrases can be found in different places within a sentence in order to kind of modify the message that the author is trying to get across. So they could be sentence openers or subject-verb splits or also sentence closers. So these are fairly true stories from my high school experience. Here's your green sentence opener. Laughing at the joke, she spit out her coffee. That might have happened on a first date I had. But regardless, laughing at the joke is an example of a participial phrase. So laughing would be our participle. We've got at the joke as a modifier. So altogether, that's my phrase. And the entire phrase is modifying this pronoun she. So remember, since participles act as adjectives, they can do the same thing adjectives do, which is to modify nouns or pronouns. However, I could also take that phrase and put it in the middle of my sentence, and this has the effect of drawing out the sentence a little bit because it splits up the subject from the predicate, so it kind of creates a little bit of suspense. So here's my purple sentence. The girl, laughing at his joke, spit out her coffee. So as you read that, there's a little bit of a question about what is the girl doing because you have that phrase inserted in the middle that kind of breaks it up. So it creates a little bit of tension. And then in the blue sentence, here's kind of what happened on the other side. Her date observed her spitting out the coffee. And here, spitting out the coffee is modifying her. And again, those are all acting as adjectives. So in keeping with my tradition of showing you embarrassing photos from my youth, I looked for a picture from this story, but I didn't have a picture from my really embarrassing first date. So instead, here's a picture of me from my senior prom. And it was equally embarrassing because about 10 minutes after we took this picture, I had to make my prom date pull over, and then I threw up on the side of the road, and then I had to go home with the flu, so it was kind of a bummer. But anyway, doesn't my little brother look cute? He was better than my date anyway. So these are examples of participial phrases in different spots in the sentence. And before we close out, I want to look at some examples, both of participles and participial phrases. So in our red sentence over here, I say runners in middle and long distance track events usually begin from a standing start, but sprinters who need greater initial power for a short dash typically use a crouch start. So in this sentence, we're looking for just a plain participle. And if you look at this middle section here, we have standing functioning as a participle that's modifying start. Here's another sentence in green. After I accidentally cut myself with the bread knife, I wrapped my bleeding finger in a towel. So in this case, we have an ing participle, bleeding, and it's modifying finger. So it's just modifying or telling us what is happening to the finger. Let's also look at some examples of participial phrases. So in purple here, I have for an afternoon treat, Nancy made a slushie in the blender with finely crushed ice and fresh cherries. So crushed is our participle here, but if we want to include all of its modifiers, we'd actually have to look before it to where we get finely as well. So finely crushed is our participial phrase, and it's modifying ice. And then in our last one, just to give you an example of a different type of participle, I actually have two sentences here in blue. Complementary colors are colors that appear on opposite sides of the color wheel. Shown together in an image, they provide the greatest visual contrast. So in this example, it's actually the beginning part of our second sentence that functions as the participial phrase, shown together in an image. So shown is actually the participle, and then all the modifiers that go with it create the participial phrase, and it's all functioning to modify they, which is the subject of our sentence here. And that's a pronoun that's referring to colors, so that would be our antecedent. So we'll look at some more examples of these in class tomorrow, and we'll practice being able to tell the difference between a gerund and a participle.